For generations, one of the most mysterious moments in the entire Bible has continued to provoke questions, debate, fascination, and deep reflection. It is not a long story. In fact, it appears in only a few verses. Yet those few verses contain enough tension, mystery, and spiritual depth. It is the story of a night, a dark night beside a river, a night in which a man is left completely alone, separated from his family and possessions, a night in which silence should have been his only companion. But instead, something unexpected happened. A man appeared out of the darkness. A struggle began, and that struggle lasted until dawn. The man who fought that night was Jacob. But to understand why that night mattered so much, you first have to understand the kind of man Jacob had been for most of his life. Because the mystery of that night cannot be separated from the long and complicated road that led him there. Jacob was not just any man. He was the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, which means he stood inside one of the most important family lines in the biblical narrative. God had made promises to Abraham. Those promises passed to Isaac, and Jacob was part of that same unfolding story. But although the promises around Jacob were holy, the life Jacob lived was often complicated, conflicted, and full of tension. In many ways, his story began in struggle even before he was born. His mother, Rebekah, was pregnant with twins, but the pregnancy was deeply troubling. The children inside her seemed to be struggling violently with one another. This was not normal movement. It felt like conflict. Disturbed by what she was experiencing, Rebekah asked the Lord why this was happening, and the answer she received was extraordinary. She was told that two nations were in her womb, and that two peoples would be separated from within her body. And then came the shocking line: the older would serve the younger. In that world, that was not the expected order. In that culture, the firstborn son carried special rights, authority, inheritance, and family honor. But before these boys were even born, God announced the order would be overturned. When the day of birth came, Esau emerged first. He was red and hairy, and he grew into a man of the open country, a hunter, strong and impulsive. Then came Jacob, and the Bible gives us a strange little detail that feels symbolic from the very first moment. Jacob was holding Esau's heel as he came out. That is why he was given the name Jacob, associated with grasping, supplanting, overtaking. And when you look at the rest of his life, that meaning seems to follow him everywhere. Jacob grows up in the shadow of his brother, but also in competition. He is not the bold hunter Esau is. He is quieter, more calculating, more observant. He watches. He waits. He notices weakness. One day Esau returns from the field exhausted, and in that moment Jacob sees an opportunity. Esau is hungry, desperate, and careless. Jacob has stew. Esau wants it. And Jacob does something that reveals a great deal about his character. He says he will give his brother the food only if Esau sells him his birthright. Think about that for a moment. This is not a small exchange. This is not merely food for money. The birthright represented inheritance, status, and leadership. It mattered deeply. But Esau, driven by the immediate hunger of the moment, dismisses the long-term value of what he is giving away. He agrees. And just like that, Jacob acquires something precious from his brother, not through violence, but through timing, calculation, and human weakness. Now stop and think about this. Was Jacob simply clever, or was he already becoming a man who believed blessings had to be seized by strategy rather than trust? That is the kind of question that makes this story so gripping. Because from the very beginning, Jacob is not a simple hero. He is layered. He is chosen, but he is also complicated. He is part of God's promise, yet his methods often seem tangled in human ambition. The tension only deepens as the years go on. Isaac, their father, grows old. His sight begins to fail. The time comes for the patriarchal blessing to be given. This blessing is not just a father's kind words. It carries authority, destiny, and covenant weight. Isaac intends to give it to Esau. But Rebekah remembers the words spoken before the twins were born. She believes Jacob is meant to receive what is coming, so she devises a plan, and Jacob joins her in it. Esau is out hunting. Rebekah prepares food the way Isaac likes it. She covers Jacob's hands and neck with goat skins, so he will feel hairy like Esau. Jacob dresses in his brother's clothes. Then he walks into his father's presence pretending to be someone else. Think about how bold this moment is. An old blind father is about to pronounce the defining blessing over a son, and Jacob stands there under false identity. Isaac is suspicious. He asks questions. He notices that the voice sounds like Jacob, but the hands feel like Esau. The smell of the clothes seems right. Eventually, Isaac blesses him. When Esau later enters and the truth comes out, the house is filled with shock, grief, and rage. Esau cries out bitterly. Isaac trembles violently, and Jacob once again has taken what belonged to his brother. But this time the consequences are far more dangerous. Esau's anger is no longer just frustration. It becomes murderous. He begins planning revenge. Jacob must flee for his life. And so the man who gained the blessing cannot stay to enjoy it. He must run. This is another fascinating tension in Jacob's story. He receives blessing, but he often walks into pain immediately afterward. Have you ever noticed that? How often do people pursue something they believe they must have, only to discover that even when they get it, it comes wrapped in consequences they did not want? Jacob leaves home. He leaves his mother, he leaves his father, he leaves the land of familiarity and goes to his uncle Laban. On the journey, exhausted and vulnerable, he has another significant encounter. He sleeps with a stone under his head and dreams of a ladder, a stairway reaching between earth and heaven, with angels ascending and descending, and the Lord standing above it, reaffirming the covenant promises given to Abraham and Isaac. This moment matters because it shows that despite Jacob's deception, God has not abandoned the promise. But Jacob is still Jacob. His inner transformation does not happen all at once. When he reaches Laban, he enters another long season of conflict. Labor, love, disappointment, and being deceived himself. It is almost as if Jacob begins to live through the kind of manipulation he once used on others. He falls in love with Rachel and agrees to work 7 years for her. But on the wedding night, he is deceived and given Leah instead. The deceiver is deceived. The man who took under disguise is now trapped by disguise. He must work another 7 years for Rachel. Years pass. His family grows. Rivalries grow inside the home. Children are born. Wealth increases. Herds multiply. Tensions with Laban rise and fall. Jacob prospers, but his life remains emotionally crowded and spiritually unfinished. Outwardly, he becomes a successful man. Inwardly, old unfinished business still exists, because Esau is still in the background of his story. The brother he wronged has never been faced. The wound has never been settled. The fear has never completely died. After many years, the time comes for Jacob to leave Laban and return to the land of his fathers. On the surface, it looks like a homecoming. But deep down, Jacob knows it is also an approach toward judgment. He is going back not only to a place, but to a past he once escaped. He sends messengers ahead to Esau with respectful words, calling him "my lord" and referring to himself as "your servant." He tries to soften the encounter before it happens. The messengers return with news that freezes his heart. Esau is coming to meet him, and 400 men are with him. 400 men. Think about how those words must have sounded to Jacob. This does not look like a peaceful reunion. It sounds like force. It sounds like power. It sounds like unfinished anger moving toward him, with numbers strong enough to destroy him. And this is where the psychological depth of the story becomes so powerful. Jacob is no longer the young man stealing a blessing in his father's tent. He is older now. He has wives, children, servants, flocks, responsibility. He has far more to lose. His fear is not just for himself anymore. It is for everyone he loves. So he begins doing what he has often done in life. He plans carefully. He divides his people and animals into two camps, reasoning that if Esau attacks one, the other may escape. He arranges gifts. He stages waves of livestock to be sent ahead as presents. He calculates. He strategizes. He tries to reduce the danger through wisdom and diplomacy. But then, in the middle of all those preparations, something deeply human breaks through. Jacob prays. And his prayer is one of the most revealing prayers in the entire Old Testament because you can hear both faith and fear in it. He reminds God of the promises. He says he is unworthy of all the steadfast love and faithfulness God has shown him. He remembers crossing the Jordan with only his staff and now returning with abundance. He asks for deliverance from the hand of his brother. He fears Esau may come and attack not just him, but the mothers and children with him. This is not a polished prayer. It is a desperate one. It comes from a man who has reached the limit of what strategy can do. And maybe that is exactly where transformation often begins. Not when a person has no intelligence left, but when intelligence is no longer enough. Jacob keeps sending gifts ahead. He sends servants. He arranges everything carefully. And then, as night falls, he takes his wives, his female servants, his children, and all that he has. And he sends them across the ford of the Jabbok. One by one, everyone crosses. Everything crosses. And then the Bible says something simple, but heavy with meaning. Jacob was left alone. That sentence feels small, but it carries enormous weight. Because now there are no servants to impress, no brother yet to appease, no wife to speak with, no children to protect in the immediate moment, no father, no mother, no Laban, no Esau standing physically in front of him, no audience, no disguise, just Jacob, alone. And isn't that often where the deepest confrontations happen? Not in crowds, not in noise, but in isolation. When a person can no longer hide behind movement, activity, planning, or explanation. What would you think in such a night? If you knew that by morning you might face the person you had most feared for years, what would your mind sound like in the dark? What old memories would return? What guilt would rise? What prayers would repeat themselves? What regrets would speak louder than the river in the night? That is the emotional landscape into which the mystery suddenly erupts. Because the story does not say Jacob drifted to sleep peacefully. It does not say he sat and reflected quietly until dawn. It says that a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. No explanation, no warning, no name, just sudden conflict in the darkness. And from that moment on, the story becomes one of the strangest and most unforgettable in all of Scripture. And from that moment on, the night beside the Jabbok River becomes one of the most mysterious and dramatic moments in the entire biblical narrative. A man suddenly appears in the darkness, and without explanation, without warning, a physical struggle begins. The text does not say that Jacob was attacked with weapons. It does not say there was shouting or conversation at first. It simply says that a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Imagine that moment. The air is cool. The river moves quietly in the background. The sky is dark, filled with stars. They witness something no one else can see. Two figures locked in struggle in the silence of the night. No audience, no witnesses, no explanation. Why would a man suddenly wrestle with Jacob in such a moment? Was it an ambush? Was it an accident? Was it a test? These are the kinds of questions that make this story so fascinating. The Bible tells it in a way that invites curiosity. It leaves space for reflection. It leaves room for mystery. The struggle continues for hours. It is not a short conflict, nor a brief moment of resistance. It is an extended wrestling match that stretches through the entire night. Think about the physical intensity of that. Wrestling requires strength, balance, determination, and endurance. Muscles burn. Breathing becomes heavy. The ground is marked with signs of struggle. Yet neither of them stops. The silence of the night becomes filled with the sounds of effort, movement, and determination. But something about this struggle is different from a normal fight. Normally, one person eventually gains clear advantage. Yet the text suggests something unusual. The struggle continues without a clear winner. Hour after hour, they remain locked together. The mysterious man does not overpower Jacob quickly. Jacob does not defeat the stranger either. It is a prolonged contest of persistence. This detail alone invites a deep question. Who is this man who can wrestle with Jacob for an entire night? And who is Jacob becoming in this moment that he refuses to give up? At some point in the struggle, something remarkable happens. The mysterious man touches Jacob's hip. The text describes it in a surprisingly simple way, but the result is immediate and dramatic. Jacob's hip is dislocated. Suddenly, the struggle changes. Pain shoots through his body. His balance is compromised. His strength is weakened. Anyone who has ever experienced a joint injury knows how disabling it can be. Yet even in this moment, Jacob does something unexpected. He does not let go. Even injured, even weakened, he clings to the man he has been wrestling. This detail reveals something important about Jacob's character in that moment. The man who once grasped his brother's heel at birth is now grasping something else in the darkness of the night. Perhaps without fully understanding why, he senses that this struggle carries deeper meaning than a simple fight. The mysterious man speaks. His words break the long silence of the night. Let me go, for the day is breaking. The request is strange. Why must he leave before dawn? What difference does the sunrise make? Why would a man who has wrestled all night suddenly insist on leaving at that moment? The request itself adds another layer of mystery, but Jacob's response is even more powerful. Instead of releasing him, Jacob says something that reveals the heart of the entire story. I will not let you go unless you bless me. Think about the weight of that statement. Jacob is not asking for victory in the fight. He is asking for a blessing. In that moment, it becomes clear that Jacob believes this encounter is not accidental. Somehow he senses that the person he is wrestling with holds spiritual authority. The struggle has transformed into something more than physical conflict. It has become a moment of spiritual confrontation, a moment of transformation, a moment where Jacob is no longer simply defending himself, but seeking something deeper. The mysterious man asks a question. What is your name? On the surface, this question seems simple, but in the context of the story, it carries enormous meaning. Names in the ancient world were deeply connected to identity, character, and destiny. When Jacob answers with his name, he is not just identifying himself. He is acknowledging the identity he has carried all his life, the identity associated with grasping, striving, and overcoming through cleverness, the identity of the man who took his brother's birthright and blessing. The mysterious man then speaks words that change Jacob's life forever. Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. This statement introduces one of the greatest mysteries in the Bible. Did Jacob really wrestle with God? Or was the figure an angel acting on God's behalf? Or was this a symbolic encounter that represents something deeper in the relationship between humanity and the divine? Scholars have debated this question for centuries. Some believe the man was an angel, others believe it was a direct manifestation of God in human form. Still others see the moment as a profound spiritual vision expressed through physical imagery. Yet the text itself gives an important clue. After the encounter, Jacob names the place Peniel, which means face of God, and he explains why. For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. This statement reveals Jacob's own interpretation of what happened that night. He believed he had encountered God, and yet he survived. That alone is astonishing. Throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the presence of God is often described as overwhelming, powerful, even dangerous for humans to encounter directly. And yet here stands Jacob, wounded but alive, changed but not destroyed, injured yet blessed. Another detail in the story adds symbolic weight to the moment. As the struggle ends and the blessing is given, the sun begins to rise. The long night is over. Light slowly spreads across the horizon. The same man who entered the night carrying fear and uncertainty now walks into the sunrise with a new name and a new identity. But he does not walk normally. Because of the injury to his hip, Jacob limps. The limp becomes a permanent reminder of the encounter. Every step he takes from that day forward carries the memory of that night, the night he struggled, the night he refused to let go, the night he received a new name, the night Jacob became Israel. And yet the story still invites more questions. Why did God choose a wrestling match as the moment of transformation? Why not a vision? Why not a voice from heaven? Why a struggle that lasted through the entire night? Perhaps the answer lies in Jacob's entire life story. Jacob had always been a man who struggled. He struggled with his brother. He struggled with circumstances. He struggled for blessing. He struggled through years of labor and deception. His entire life had been a wrestling match with destiny. So perhaps this final struggle beside the river was not simply a fight. Perhaps it was a mirror of his entire life, a moment where his past, his fears, his guilt, and his destiny all collided in one long night of resistance and perseverance. And as the sun rises, the man who limps away from that river is no longer defined by the name Jacob alone. He now carries the name Israel, a name that will later become the name of an entire nation. But the mystery of that night remains. Who was the man in the darkness? Was it truly God? Was it an angel? Or was it a moment when heaven touched earth in a way that human language can only partially describe? And perhaps the deeper question remains for every reader of the story. If you were alone beside that river, in the silence of the night, carrying the weight of your past and the uncertainty of your future, and suddenly a struggle began that would change your identity forever, would you have the strength to hold on until the blessing came? The morning after the struggle beside the Jabbok River began with a strange mixture of exhaustion, pain, and transformation. Jacob had not slept. His body ached from the long hours of wrestling. His hip was injured, and every movement reminded him of the mysterious encounter that had just taken place. Yet despite the physical pain, something deeper had changed within him. The man who had entered the night as Jacob now carried a new name, Israel. But what did that name truly mean for him? And perhaps even more importantly, what would happen next? The reason Jacob had remained behind had not disappeared. The meeting with his brother Esau still lay ahead. That encounter might prove to be just as intense as the struggle he had experienced in the darkness. As the sun rose higher, Jacob began to move forward. The text tells us that he limped because of his injured hip. A man walking slowly, each step marked by pain, yet also by determination. The limp was more than a physical injury. It was a permanent reminder that something extraordinary had happened. It was a mark of transformation. For the rest of his life, Jacob would carry that memory. But before long, the moment he had feared for years finally arrived. In the distance, Esau appeared, and he was not alone. 400 men were with him. Think about what that sight must have felt like for Jacob. Years earlier, Esau had been furious enough to consider killing him. Now he was approaching with a large group of men. Was this the moment of revenge? Was this the moment when the past would finally catch up with Jacob? As Esau and his men drew closer, Jacob began arranging his family carefully. He placed the servants and their children first. Leah and her children came next. Rachel and Joseph were placed last. Jacob seemed to be protecting those he loved most. Then Jacob himself moved ahead of everyone else. This is another important moment. The man who once ran away now walks forward to face him, and as he approaches, Jacob bows to the ground 7 times. 7 times he lowers himself in humility before Esau. Each bow is a sign of respect, perhaps even an expression of apology. The tension in this moment is almost unbearable. What will Esau do? Will he remember the betrayal of the past? Will anger return? Will violence erupt? But something unexpected happens. Esau runs toward Jacob, not with a weapon, not with anger. Instead, he embraces him. The 2 brothers fall into each other's arms and begin to weep. For years, Jacob had imagined the worst possible outcome. Yet in this moment, something remarkable occurs. Reconciliation. The brother who once wanted revenge now shows compassion. The man who once fled in fear now receives forgiveness. And this raises an interesting question. Did the transformation that occurred beside the river somehow prepare Jacob for this moment? Did the struggle with the mysterious figure change the way Jacob approached his brother? The Jacob who stands before Esau now is not the same man. Something has shifted. His confidence is different. His humility is visible. And perhaps the blessing he received gave him the courage to face the past. Esau looks at the family surrounding Jacob and asks who all these people are. Jacob explains that they are the children God has graciously given him. The groups approach and bow before Esau. Even Joseph and Rachel bow as they come forward. Then Esau asks about the large groups of animals that had been sent ahead earlier. Jacob explains that they were gifts intended to find favor. Esau initially refuses them, saying that he already has plenty. But Jacob insists that Esau accept the gifts, and the words Jacob speaks in that moment reveal something important about how he now understands the previous night's encounter. Jacob says that seeing Esau's face is like seeing the face of God, because Esau has received him favorably. That phrase is fascinating. Only hours earlier, Jacob had named the place Peniel, saying he had seen God face to face. Now he says something similar about seeing his brother's face. Could it be that the encounter with God prepared him to face his brother differently? Could it be that the real transformation was not only about Jacob's relationship with God, but also about his relationship with other people? The story continues as Esau offers to accompany Jacob on the journey, but Jacob politely declines, explaining that the children and animals need to travel slowly. Eventually, the brothers separate peacefully. And with that, one of the longest unresolved tensions in Jacob's life finally comes to an end. Yet the mystery of the night at the river remains. Even after the reconciliation with Esau, the deeper question surrounding that night beside the Jabbok River continues to echo through history. Who was the man who wrestled with Jacob until dawn? The biblical text itself leaves room for interpretation, and that is part of what makes the story so powerful. In the book of Hosea, the prophet later reflects on this event and describes Jacob as having struggled with an angel. That detail has led many readers to believe that the mysterious opponent was not an ordinary human being, but a divine messenger sent by God. Others believe the encounter was even more extraordinary. They believe Jacob wrestled with a direct manifestation of God himself, sometimes described as a theophany, a moment in which God appears in human form. Still, others view the story through a symbolic lens, seeing the wrestling match as a representation of Jacob's lifelong struggle with faith, identity, and destiny. But perhaps the reason the story has endured for so many centuries is that it refuses to fit neatly into only one explanation. It remains mysterious. It remains open to reflection. And it invites every reader to ask deeper questions. Why did the encounter take place at night? Why did it happen when Jacob was completely alone? Why did the struggle last until dawn? And why did the mysterious figure insist on leaving before the sunrise? These details seem small, but in ancient storytelling, they often carry symbolic meaning. Night is often associated with uncertainty, fear, and transformation. Dawn represents revelation, clarity, and new beginnings. Jacob entered the night as one man and left the morning as another. He entered the night as Jacob, the one who grasped, the one who struggled through cleverness and strategy. He left the morning as Israel, the one who had struggled with God and received a blessing. But the transformation did not remove all struggle from his life. In fact, his limp served as a permanent reminder that spiritual encounters often leave lasting marks. Sometimes transformation does not make life easier. Sometimes it simply changes the direction in which a person walks. Imagine Jacob walking forward in the years after that night, every step slightly uneven because of the injured hip, every movement reminding him of the struggle, every sunrise reminding him of the moment when darkness gave way to blessing. The story also contains a small cultural detail that became important for the descendants of Israel. Because Jacob's hip had been injured, the people of Israel later adopted a tradition of not eating the tendon attached to the hip socket of animals. Even centuries later, the memory of that night remained embedded in their practices. That alone shows how deeply the story shaped their identity. Yet perhaps the most powerful element of the story is the persistence Jacob showed during the struggle. When the mysterious man said, "Let me go," Jacob refused. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Those words have echoed through history because they capture something deeply human. The determination to hold on, the refusal to release hope, the insistence that the struggle must lead to something meaningful. Many readers throughout history have seen their own spiritual journeys reflected in that moment. Times when life feels like a struggle in the darkness. Times when answers seem distant and the future uncertain. Times when a person feels as though they are wrestling with questions about purpose, identity, and faith. In those moments, the story of Jacob offers an image of perseverance. Not a perfect man, not a flawless hero, but a person who refused to let go until the blessing came. And perhaps that is why this story continues to captivate readers even today, because it suggests that the most important transformations in life often happen in moments of struggle rather than comfort. They happen in the darkness before the dawn. They happen when a person refuses to give up even when the outcome is uncertain. And so the mystery remains. Who was the man at the river? Why did he wrestle with Jacob? Why did the struggle end with a blessing instead of defeat? The Bible does not provide every answer. Instead, it leaves the story open, inviting each generation to reflect on its meaning. And perhaps that is the final question the story quietly asks every reader. If you found yourself in the darkness of your own struggles, facing the fears of your past and the uncertainty of your future, and a moment came when everything depended on whether you would let go or hold on, would you have the courage to say what Jacob said that night beside the river? "I will not let you go unless you bless me."